that's what I love about my job, that I can see something completely different and still have that visceral reaction. It still moves me. That's what I want others to have.
This is Platemark. My name is Ann Shafer, and I am your host. I'm an independent curator specializing in prints and printmaking. You've reached us at Series 3 of Platemark, in which I interview the wonderful people who occupy the print ecosphere. But today's guest, Kimberli Gant, is a little bit adjacent. She is a curator, the curator of modern and contemporary art at the Brooklyn Museum up in New York. But guess what? She loves prints. So we're going to suck her into our world, people. I hope you enjoy the conversation. We got into all sorts of things about negotiating this and that around the museum world. It's a chance for me to nerd out and remember why we started the podcast in the first place, kind of hearkening back to conversations I had in Series 1 with Ben Levy about, the state of the state, as it were. My positionality, I identify as a cis-het white woman, and I use the pronouns she, her. I record Platemark in Baltimore, Maryland, the land of the Piscataway Conoy people. Any images that Kimberli and I talk about, there are not very many actually, will be available to you over at the website, platemarkpodcast.com. And also over there is a support and donate button. It would help us keep the lights on if you would head on over there and click it and choose between two things. One, a $5 per month membership, and two, a one-time donation of your choosing. From the bottom of my heart, I thank you for even considering it, and thank you to all of those who have already contributed. It means the world to me. Thank you so much. Okay, buckle up and here we go. Kimberli, it's so great to see you. Thank you for doing this with me. Welcome to Platemark.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, thanks. I would love you to introduce yourself for our listeners.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kimberli Gant, and I work as the curator of modern and contemporary art at the Brooklyn Museum, which I've been doing
Woohoo.
for almost a full year now. So it's been very
Oh my
exciting.
gosh, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
How's it going?
It's been going really wonderful. It's nice to be back in New York. I hadn't lived there for about 5 years. You tend to try and go back and forth, but it's nice to really be back living in Brooklyn, working in Brooklyn, and I'm enjoying it. It's going good.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
I think my listeners are probably confused because usually I'm talking to the print curators, and you are across techniques and whatevers. You do it
Yes.
all in modern and contemporary. So the reason I wanted to talk to you was because we ran into each other at the IFPDA print fair, and you were about to go on stage and interview the Black women of print, which I
Yes.
missed because I had another appointment. I'm so sorry. But I was like, "Ooh, you're not a print curator. I need to talk
Yeah.
to you."
Thank you. No, it was a wonderful conversation. I'm not a print specialist, though I did train and do a lot of work in photography. So I did do works on paper. But throughout the years, I think as most people tend to know, even though we specialize and specialize in graduate school, depending on the type of institution that you go to, you tend to become a generalist. And I have always done modern and contemporary. Before I was at the Brooklyn Museum, I was at the Chrysler Museum, and I was there for 5 years, and I was the curator of modern and contemporary there. And like most museums, it has one of those kinds of odd ways in which it the curators organizes the collection. So it also didn't have a prints or drawings curator. We did have a curator for photography. We also had a curator for glass. So that gave me some flexibility in being able to acquire prints for the collection. We had an existing prints collection, works on paper with drawings. And we had a fellow who was working with us on that for a couple of years to help us organize it because they wanted to create a study center. So it gave me the opportunity to really see the works on paper that we had in the collection and work with them. I did a small prints and drawings show related to the relationship between U.S. and Mexico in the early 20th century and all the American, U.S. artists who kind of traveled there and vice versa. So I got a bit of a taste for it. And what I then realized was how much I didn't know from that. I was like, hey, there's a lot about prints, particularly prints. I was like, I have no idea. And I think you hear the different terminologies, but unless you really specialize in it or work with it a lot, you don't really know what that means unless you're doing a lot of extended outside research. So that kind of gave me the impetus to try and find opportunities to work more and learn more about prints and drawings, as particularly prints, because I just felt, hey, if I'm going to actually work on this material and continue to work on this material throughout my career, it would be helpful to at least feel like I have some sort of basic understanding of the material. So I feel like I could actually talk about it.
We, the print peoples, always say there are rare schools that have a history of prints, or even like a, unless you're in a studio program. How did you learn yourself all this stuff?
Well, again, to your point, yeah, it wasn't what I had trained in, and I wasn't a studio person. So a lot of it was trying to learn in books. I'm actually still trying to learn. I was able to actually apply at the time. The Research Center had offered an opportunity for, they were trying to, I think, get more curators that were working in prints, but also those who I think were working with institutions that had the collection, but they didn't have a specialized curator. And we did basically about a 2-week training, like a seminar through the Brodsky Print Center related to the Pennsylvania Academy for Fine Arts. So that at least gave me some more real world hands on experience.
So the cohort with the Getty, I've had several friends who've done it who've gotten a lot out of it. How was it for you?
Mhm. I thought it was really good. It definitely gave me a taste for more because we had a great virtual seminar because I got put on hold because of COVID.
Oh, right.
So it was supposed to happen in 2020, didn't happen, but they at least tried. So they got pushed back for a year, and then we didn't wind up having it until the summer 2021, spring. But they did try to have some virtual lectures and discussions, which were very helpful. And then we spent a few days at PAFA in the studio, which was really nice. And that has really inspired me to try and look for some outside training that I can just do myself, because it showed me I'm not going to really understand the techniques until I do them. And this actually has really made me, I think, frustrated with how we train art historians, and
Yes.
I really think that when not just taking your required 1 or 2 studio classes as an undergrad, like if you're going to be a art historian, I really think that we all need to be have a minor in studio, and actually
Ooh.
I and then also get to take art classes in graduate school, especially.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to be an artist. I am trying to understand the processes and the techniques so that when a contemporary artist, especially, is telling me what they're doing, I have a much better understanding of what it is. And therefore, when I'm actually doing my research, doing my critique, and names that I know, I also can see not just the relationship of content, but also really the process. I think I, as an art historian, lack that bit of real training and that way of presenting a narrative to a viewer, by not understanding the process as much as I should. So I'm trying to figure out ways to do that.
No, I think you're right, and I have talked about this on the podcast before, for sure, for sure. Because when I was coming up in the biz, I wasn't dealing with contemporary art yet, and I mean, I had no idea what I didn't have any idea, and it wasn't until I was looking at contemporary much more closely, and then working, directly with artists who are living, because I
Hmm.
had never done that before, that this whole issue became very much clear that I needed more training. Not that I'm that good at it, but I have done a little bit and I have enough of a respect for it to, sort of be like, oh, I can't do that lithograph thing. No way.
Right. And then again, I'm not, to your point, it's not about trying to do it. I'm not trying to be an artist. I am just trying to understand.
Hmm.
And it's just, to me, another form of research. And
Hmm.
I think schools really need to understand that, especially I think we're in a mode where contemporary art has become the, a la mode for being curatorial research. So it really behooves them to actually get the students to know, and also to develop these relationships early. I mean, we know how much working on, doing shows, meeting with artists is about who you're connected with, who you know. And so getting to be in the studio classes start those relationships so much earlier than they could be. So I really think that there needs to be much more of that. And what I've also found is that it's also, I think, as an adult, when you're not doing it when you're not trying to do studio work as an expert, as someone who's really doing it to be a maker, I found that it's really difficult to find, I think specifically in printmaking, I'm finding this. I have yet to find classes where you can kind of get some, like, a couple of months training, almost basically like a semester, and just learning all the different techniques. Every technique is its own class.
Hmm.
So it becomes this whole thing. I'm just like, well, I don't have all the money to take 25 different classes,
Yeah.
learn this. So I still think I would love it if I could find printmaking 101 essentially,
Hmm. Yeah.
which would be really, really great. Same with, I think you can find that with like painting and drawing and sculpture. But I think printmaking is that one because there's so many different techniques. They,
Yes. Yeah. And it's
yeah,
complicated.
right.
Right. It's not, I mean, not to denigrate anyone who draws, but it's a lot different than putting your pencil on a piece of paper and making
Hmm.
marks, right?
Very, very much so.
Yeah. And that's always the thing that I think can put people off because it requires investment.
Hmm.
But I do find over my career, just looking at all of these different artists who work in print, who also work in other things, that they kind of swirl around and reflect each other,
Yeah.
and yeah, and so when you hit on an artist who uses printmaking, it does take a special brain. You're working backwards, all that stuff.
Hmm.
you know,
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
right?
you're working backwards, but you're also, I think, your brain is already seeing how so many different techniques could potentially work together, and that you're an experimenter and you want to try. And I think that's amazing. And I think so many contemporary artists are doing that where, their work is not definable in one category. Everyone's a multi hyphenate. You're trying different techniques, different processes, different ways in which things work together. So it behooves you to have that brain of saying, well, let me try how this works and let me see how that's going. And I think as a curator, you're trying to create this narrative. You're trying to create this exciting dynamic story for your viewers, and you might lose a lot of them if you can't really show the incredible way in which the work is being created. The final product, right, that's amazing, but all the layering, all of the experimentation, all the materials, all of that you need to create an 8 color print or etchings. It's so much cooler when you start to realize, oh my God, all that they did to make
Hmm.
that final thing.
Yeah, no, the layering is definitely a thing, and printmakers they're all problem solvers.
Yeah,
It's a kind of a different approach to creativity, I think. Really, it's
definitely.
fascinating to watch them. Honestly, obviously, I love it, and I'm glad we're hooking you in.
Yeah, no, I mean, I got hooked, and it's something that I will definitely probably keep going back to. So it's nice to be able to just mix in different types of art, whether it's printmaking, painting, photography, sculpture. You really do try and become a bit of a jack of all trades, which can be sometimes to your detriment at the same time, too, because you're just like, well, I'm not really a master of anything, but at least I can talk about, I just want to be able to talk about things coherently. So
Sure.
even if I don't know it expertly, an artist goes like, "Oh, okay, I can have a deeper level conversation with you because you get where I'm going with
Hmm.
that."
Yeah. What curators have to cover has always fascinated me because you're set in sort of a time period, and you have
Mhm.
to go from discipline to discipline to discipline. In a print room, I had to be able to talk to you about Albert Durr to tomorrow.
Right. Mhm.
So the generalist thing goes in a different kind of dimension because I'm talking about like these historic moments. It's so funny. Like you do become a generalist and you're like, I don't
Yeah.
know nothing about that guy, but I can tell you about how
Right.
he made it.
Right, and that's the thing. I mean, because when you become this generalist, then you start to freak out because you realize so much that you don't know. And
Hmm.
you're going, holy crap. I'm just going to spend my whole life just still learning more, which on
Yeah.
one level is cool, but on another level, you just kind of also go, this is exhausting.
Yeah, yes, for me, skipping around in the storeroom and digging, I'd be looking for something in a specific box, and I just go through the entire box just to see what was there and start. I have
Yeah.
like a slide projector in my brain. Like, wait, where did I see that thing? Who was this?
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
think that that's, one thing that I worry about now is just having the time to play in the storage, actually just seeing, oh my God, we have this, we have that, we have this, we have that. You can only learn so much from like the database. And then on top of it, like you said, with when you do modern and contemporary, the time is different than being a media specialist. And on top of it, you're also trying to link across cultures and geographies.
Oh, right.
And you're not an expert there. So you're going, luckily I feel as if I have enough colleagues who have their specialties. So it really does become a collaboration in knowledge building, which I think is wonderful because we can't know everything. We shouldn't know everything. And let your colleagues know what they know really well and educate you and vice versa and work together to say, oh, here's a way that we can bridge what we know and what we don't in a way that a viewer's going to know, oh, that's really cool. I wouldn't have known that this artist is not only looking at, you know, Tibetan tapestries with etching, like, whatever it is that they're doing, that this contemporary person is taking all of this knowledge of art history that they're playing and experimenting with and trying to put it together in a final piece. And maybe you're only seeing a part of it, and then someone else is and goes like, oh my God, that's that over there. And then you go, ah, that's something else I didn't know. And so you've got all these incredible links, which I just think is
Right.
wonderful.
Yeah. I do remember the moments that when somebody, maybe the curator who was responsible for the African continent, would bring in a contemporary work on paper, and then the contemporary curator would show up, and I'd show up, and the Africanist would show up, and we'd all have to,
Mhm.
decide if it was worth putting forward or whatever. And it was like everybody was soaking up everybody's, ideas about what this was and how it fit in the collection. I mean, it was really kind of crazy and great.
Yeah, I think it's even I love it simply because not only are you soaking up each other's knowledge, but you're also realizing, oh, look at how many different ways that this one object can be utilized into the collection. And when you have three people going, yes, like there's so much here, that's also just that gives so much, I think, or hopefully it gives a lot of credit to the artist, to the maker, because that person is drawing on so many different things. And maybe they didn't even know they were drawing on all these different things. But you, as someone who's got some more expertise, can say, all right, I can add this to a whole nother level of conversation and just give viewers just so much more richness of knowledge.
It's absolutely true. And back to your point about wandering around in storage, I don't know if you can manage it, but like I used to set aside a morning to just be in there and looking and looking and looking. And there's, I mean, how else are you supposed to learn the collection, right?
True.
But I started keeping, a crazy list, like, figures with monkeys playing organ, like great clouds, eyeglasses, sports, whatever it was. But it's like browsing in a real live library as opposed
Mm,
to trying to pick a book off Amazon. Something strikes you and it spurs another thought and a different direction, and you put
yeah.
this little exhibition in your head together just from wandering around the store.
And you know what? That's actually really, I need to do that more. And I've been thinking about that. I was like, I just need to get to storage and just set aside time. What's so crazy is it just reminds me of how everything has to go in my calendar now. It's like, all right, I got to block out thinking time. I have to block out admin time. You got your regular meetings. I'm just like, now I need to block out some
Hmm.
storage time and just,
Yeah.
because you forget or you forget about that, I think, because you get so caught up in the admin.
Hmm.
I think that's part of the problem. I just get caught up on like, oh, I got this due and that due, and you're working on a checklist, and but it all feeds it.
Answering emails.
Right. So, my God, the emails.
Yeah.
Yeah. I got to work on stopping that.
I know. Good luck.
Thanks.
The Brooklyn Museum is kind of special in that it has a very historic and wonderful print collection, works on paper collection,
Mhm.
but it doesn't have a dedicated curator.
Right.
I know from colleagues who've applied for jobs there in the past that, there was a moment when they might have hired one and then they didn't. And so you as everybody shares the works on paper collection because
Yes.
there's works on paper in there that relate to each of your areas.
Hmm.
But is there a gatekeeper? Like, did the collection management team from the registrar's office have to help you in? Like, how is your access?
So now there's decent access. I mean, I think now that we're back post pandemic, we have the print storage. And as curators, we can go in there. I think for me as a new person, I'm still kind of understanding how things are organized. I tend to, if I'm going to look at things, I'm going to go through the database first so I can kind of find it. Because right now, it tends to be when I'm looking for things, it tends to be a very focused search. But to your point, I do want to go into the storage and just spend time opening the boxes and just seeing
Hmm.
what's in there, seeing how it's
And those big
organized.
drawers.
Right,
There's
all
good stuff in the.
exactly in the bins and the drawers and everything. But then you also have to be mindful. Now that again, to my point about being post pandemic, we've got the researchers in there reserving time, and
Mhm.
we have a limited amount of space. So you do need to kind of share that access with people, with your colleagues. They may be in there looking at different things, but we do have access to it. I just think that we individually are doing it. So you just have to be mindful of when things are being looked at, when, reservations for that type of thing. And right now, my colleague Lisa Smalls, who's our curator for European art, she's been doing a lot of work in there because of the reinstallation of the European galleries. So she's been looking at a lot of prints. There's going to be rotations there. Same with the complete opening of all the Asian collections. A lot of rotations in there. So people are definitely looking at them and using them. And then there's some other, collections rotations that are happening, collection reinstallations. Everyone's in there. You're going like, well, can I get some time? So, uh, but it's great. I think though we don't have a particular gatekeeper, I mean, there is a curatorial assistant who helps manage, the organizing of the timing and everything. And we have our collections team and our registrars team. We really still rely on each other just for that institutional knowledge of the collection. Just like, oh yeah, I remember seeing something like that. I remember using that piece. So that's very helpful. I guess I go back and forth, and I think it'd be awesome if there was a prints and drawings curator because I think that's an important role and a position. But I also think that it's great that we as individual curators can also add to the collection within our own kind of areas of specialty. So, I think if there is a person there, that I would still hope we could continue that collaboration of, oh, these are some prints that I really want in there. I think that's always the benefit of having a curator who's kind of managing something on both like a media specific basis. They get to
Mhm.
see the entirety in a different way by just the media. Like, well, where do we have some great holdings where maybe we need to look and focus more specifically, and can another curator help build that with me? I think it's always important now if we can pool our resources together, both content wise, strategy wise, funding wise, and then you can build these great pockets of material and help flesh out the entirety of the collection.
Does the dinner party fall under your purview, or is that sort of
That's
in its own, the feminist
that's in the
column?
feminist. So what I'm still learning is it's primarily within the feminist collection.
There's a
However,
lot of overlap, though.
right. So I mean, so things do get cross
Yeah.
categorized. So it does still fall within modern and contemporary, as well as but it was brought in by the Feminist Center. So what's really funny is when I first joined, and I have a very thick stack of, printed database information from TMS. And so I've got modern and contemporary by the time period, but then looking through how it's organized by American, Asian, African, photography, so on and so forth, feminist, as well as modern contemporary in its own collection. So, things are organized by who brought them, by the department that brought them in, but then
Oh, okay.
still cross referenced through both time and with modern and contemporary generally as well. So,
How many things are you able to acquire in a year? Do you have a robust budget?
we do acquire quite a bit. We have very supportive patrons who help us really add to the collection regularly. We have 4 collections meetings a year, and a good majority of our collection is brought in through gifts. We do acquire by, purchases as well. We have been much more targeted in recent years. The Brooklyn Museum, I think, has done a really wonderful job historically of focusing on underrepresented artists prior to it being, much more popular and kind of much more in the zeitgeist. But that still doesn't mean we, have an unlimited funds and unlimited storage. So we're having to be really strategic on what we're bringing in and really making sure that it's a really transformative gift to the collection, because you have to really be mindful of the funds that you have and what you are able to really store in perpetuity. I think we don't talk enough about just how we are stewards of these collections. And so that's a lot of maintenance every year, just making sure that things are going well. So, re-looking at everything and saying, hey, are there things that we brought in that, maybe need to be reevaluated? And before we get offered something, like, is this really going to be something that is really critical to the collection? So just
Or at least useful?
right, really,
Right.
well, not just
Right.
I think useful, but beyond useful. Really, something that's going to go, wow, this is going to really add another layer to that tale of.
That's a high bar,
It
Kimberly.
is. It is a high bar, and so it makes the acquiring of work, take longer than I think people may have be expecting, because we have to
Hmm.
really sit down and think, okay, is this going to be strong value added to the collection? Because we have a great collection. It is growing, but it can't grow indefinitely without a lot of other way, a lot of storage, a lot of support, and all of that. So you have to be very mindful.
Or some deaccessioning, the dirty word,
Right,
which
exactly.
is necessary.
Yeah.
Sorry to say, everybody.
You got to
Yeah,
evaluate.
the
Yeah.
museum. Yeah, the museums have to be free to do that.
hmm I, I,
Yeah.
I agree with you. Things that were really important, decades ago, maybe a century ago, you go like, actually, maybe not anymore. And so it is
Hmm.
important to periodically reevaluate what you have and just make sure that they're not things that are just really taking up space that are not going to be put out on view, because it's not to the benefit of anyone or anything.
Yeah. So the prints people, the works on paper people have the additional problem of having so many things because they're so affordable and easily stored
hmm
that are light sensitive
Right.
that they're hardly ever on the wall. So, the committees are always like, why should we take this if you if you're just going to put it in a drawer? And I can see their point, but it's always like there's so much more to it. The
hmm
richness of having classes come into the study centers, and
Right.
it's so hard.
It is. What I did when I was, when I would acquire prints, I would always try to get 3, if I could, depending on the price point and of the artist. So that way we at least had, my argument being, which I think print curators definitely do, is saying, well, then we can at least have things out longer by that artist. We have opportunities to rotate more. And again, it makes sense. I mean, if there are certain artists who people, I think, expect to be on view regularly. If you have a sculpture or painting, that makes it a lot easier. But sometimes you also have some, you can't afford that, but you can get some amazing prints by that individual. And you want to think about it as an investment. It's like, well, if I'm going to spend $150,000 on a painting, but I could spend, $50,000 and get three really good prints of different periods by that artist, I can also tell three different tales of that person as opposed to one by that same person. So I think we know, I think I'm speaking to the choir here, like we know to have to make those arguments. Um, we have to get our committees to see that perspective and go, no, this is not taking away from works that can be out longer. This is adding to that existing conversation or giving us the opportunity to discuss a person and their career in a way that works for that institution.
Yeah, the committees are the committees are tough, but it's I don't know. I mean, yes, you are preaching to the choir, obviously, but there you are. I feel a kindred spirit. You're in. You've come
Definitely.
into the fold.
Definitely.
So take us back to when you were a youngster. I mean, it doesn't have to go to kindergarten, but when did you like say, you know what? I think this art history thing is for me.
Officially, that happened in undergrad. I I was going to do a very different major. I had written that I was going to double major in English and chemistry,
Oh my
and I
heavens.
wanted to write the world's first interesting chemistry textbook. I don't know what I was thinking at
That's
17, but I
brilliant.
was like, hey, that essay got me into college. Then I took my first chemistry class in undergrad and I said, this is horrifying. It's a 6-hour lab. No. But I'd always really liked history and I'd had some really great history professors in high school that had incorporated, art, like all the, World War II propaganda, like imagery and posters. So visuals were always there. And I took this medieval Mediterranean history course that had a lot of relics and uses of iconography in the class. And that just really, I was like, ooh, this is a really exciting class. And wound up taking an art history class, and then I was hooked. So that's the official way I got into art history. But in the years prior to that, growing up, art was very seminal in my life. My parents are collectors. I grew up with art in my home. I grew up with posters from Faith Ringgold's exhibitions, her quilts, her story quilts. I grew up with images of, 1920s replicas of posters of Josephine Baker,
Oh, cool.
performances, photography. So I grew up with images around me, and my parents took us to museums. They took my sister and I. They took us to craft fairs and art fairs and galleries. Now, as a kid, I hated it. Maybe, maybe I thought like some of the art was cool, but when you're 12, 10, you're just like, oh my God, this is boring as all heck.
My friends are at the roller rink.
Right. Like I want to go
Right.
hang out. I want to watch the Babysitters Club, whatever the heck I thought was cool in the 80s. As I just got older, I really jokingly say it kind of hit me through osmosis. And between what I had already been experiencing growing up, unofficially through my parents, but then in the classes that I took, I don't know, kind of hit me that I could understand the world through art. And whether or not that's the cliche of like a verbal or, just the way in which I understood how knowledge could get passed to me was less about, it needed to kind of be more in like a fictional novel. It needed to be in a visual form, American history, whatever. I didn't get it. I didn't quite understand it in the book, but
Mm.
just as like words on a page, I needed the story. So the story, whether or not it happened in a painting, in a photograph, in a fictional tale of someone, living in the manifest destiny of going, settlers and all of that, those are how I understood the facts themselves. And I think that's what just excited me and drew me in.
Well, and you're talking about prints, really. That's how all those images initially
Yeah,
got around.
exactly. Yeah.
Because you didn't have the John Trumbull painting in your home, did you?
Didn't, no,
You
but
know?
that's my point. I just again, the
Yeah,
posters of the Faith Ringgold quilts,
exactly.
the
Exactly.
posters of Josephine Baker, again, lithographs, like all of those replicated images. So, and how they were circulating, but also to me that was important because when I talk to students about my career, I say I didn't understand what it meant to go to an art museum until I got older, where I got to really see firsthand these works of art that I'd been seeing in books. Or I
Mm.
remember, and it was really wasn't more than like 5 years ago. I was at the High Museum and I saw the picnic quilt in its original form that Faith Ringgold had done of Tar Beach that I had seen as poster images growing up. So I say that to people to also say like art doesn't always have to be this moment where you think it is purely an original kind of luxury privileged moment. You can see the things in a book, you can see it on TV, you can see it on Instagram, you can see it in a more less precious way and still be awed by it, still be moved by it. And then when you see it in its original, it causes to me this reaction of just pure like, oh my God, this has been in my head for so long and I'm finally seeing it. Oh my God. So
Yeah, I knew I'd like you. You have a very similar sort of sense of wonder and awe and passion about the subject that I've always felt as a curator and still do,
Mhm.
even though I'm not inside the museum looking at things. But I've had 3 jaw-dropping shivers moments in front of artwork.
Mhm.
Have you ever had one of those?
I've had a few. I think definitely the Faith Ringgold is one that I remember because it also happened relatively recently. I do remember I got to go. I was also very privileged in that I was able to travel internationally as a young person. So I think I remember seeing the Birth of Venus at the Uffizi,
Oh. Mhm.
and just I feel like it was probably when I was an undergrad. Maybe I don't think a kid, but I remember just seeing it and just going, holy shit. You know what I mean? When you just
Mhm.
because I just seen it in Jansen's, I'd been studying, you just like you're studying it in the book and it's powerful in the book, but then you just see it in real life and I go, ah, like that is it. And what's even more powerful to me is I think because I've within those moments I can remember then thinking, "Oh, I am here right now." Like it hit me
Mm.
again that I not only was I seeing this work that I'd been studying and whatnot and been seeing in books, but I was in Italy. I was at the Uffizi live in person, and that to me, it hit me again of just, oh my God, look at my life. And I think that's another thing. It reminded me of how incredibly honoring and privileged and exciting my life was, even if maybe to others it's pretty boring in many ways. I'm not out in the streets all the time, but my life isn't like this grand it's not an Indiana Jones film, you know what I mean? Like where we're just like I remember when I thought I was like, that's archaeology? Oh my God. That seems amazing and exhausting. Like I don't want to die to dig up, you know. Um, but then I think you get hit with these moments where you just realize the majority of the world will never have this. And it makes it even more special because you realize how meaningful it is.
Yeah. It's interesting though also as you and I are working in our brains and in our jobs, you especially to try and expand the canon
Mhm,
of what is. So, Botticelli's The Birth of Venus is, at the top of the pile of icons of the canon.
mhm.
And that's the thing that sort of strings the society together in a way. Like it's fascinating because I don't even know where I'm trying to say.
I mean, I think if I'm understanding what you're saying, yes, we are trying to expand the field. We are trying to show that there are so many more Botticelli equivalents in the world, but that doesn't take away from the power of Botticelli. Like it still is a powerful, important, transformative work of art, and
Yeah.
not necessarily to everybody, and that's fine.
Right.
But I will still see it. I can still see it and just go, wow.
Yeah.
And I think that there is a reason for why it is in the canon. The canon, I think we both would agree, needs to expand and shift. I was just at the Art Institute of Chicago, as I'm in Chicago right now for the holidays at home, and saw the language of art, the language of beauty in African art exhibit at the Art Institute. And it is a powerful show because, again, thinking about the birth of Venus, going back to that, it is an icon to the idea of an idealized Western perspective on beauty, of female beauty. And I think what that show is, in comparison to that, really shows how we are taught a very skewed perspective of art history still. And this exhibition is really just shifting that and just showing how, well, why are we not looking at the ways in which beauty is relative throughout the world? And that will show specifically looking at African art and more traditional African art, a lot of wooden sculptures, and masks and masquerades, but also with textiles and things. And again, I still was seeing these just small, beautifully carved figures, some large, some small, but still going,
Hmm.
still getting that sense of awe of the skill and the technique and the power of the work. And that's what I love about my job, that I can see something completely different and still have that visceral reaction. And it's not in the history books the way it should be, but it still moves me, and still, and I think that's what I want others to have. Like, you don't have to like Botticelli, you don't have to like African art, but hopefully you find something that moves you,
Hmm.
so that you realize that art is not this luxury item. It
Hmm.
is a way to see the world. And, you know, is it should be, to me, on par with creative expression. Should be on par with, you have a roof over your head, food in your mouth, a safe place, you're in a good family situation, and you have creative expression, because if there's a reason it needs to be like steam. Like, you can't just understand the world in a vacuum. I think in the pandemic really showed us that. Even if you
Hmm.
have those things taken care of, your basic necessities, creative expression should be a basic necessity for everybody.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I've always said, and Platemark listeners will know that for me, creativity is, I mean, to put it in crude terms, the thing that separates us from the animal world,
Yeah,
right? Like humans have this gift of creativity and it needs to be nurtured and honored.
exactly.
And that's why I'm still in the business. Like I would have a crisis of faith periodically, like, what does this all mean? It's just icing on the cake. But no, it isn't.
Yeah,
It's important. Yeah.
yeah. No, I completely agree with you, because,
Yeah.
and even if it is icing to a certain extent, the cake is unfinished without it. It's still an important ingredient. It's the enticement. It's like all the other parts of the senses. You still need your visual enticement as much as your sense of smell and you know,
Always makes me sad when I read about school systems, doing
oh,
away with the
I
art
know.
classes first. Like, yeah, makes me so mad. Anyway, but print. So I'm back to the prints.
Yes, sorry. I was like, we took away. So yeah,
Like
we went on
it's
a
no, no,
journey.
no, not at all. But but this idea of like the canon, and you go into the National Gallery in London, you're looking through your 101 textbook. In this room,
Hmm.
there's the Arnolfini wedding portrait. In the next room, you're like, oh my god! But somebody decided to put those things in that book. And that's why we all think of them in some
Hmm.
ways. Not to say they're not great works of art, they are. But there is a narrative that we've been fed through, and maybe not even on purpose. Somebody just said, hey, these are great work, whatever it is. But there's this whole like hierarchy about that part,
Hmm.
about originality, about the artist's
Yeah.
genius that prints kind of blow up.
Yes.
The multiplicity, and I I mean, I always feel like we're the scrappy underdog over here in the print world, but but
Yeah.
I feel like there's to your point earlier, I mean, not only the layering that goes into making them, but there's so many layers of how prints function in the world,
Yeah.
and you don't get into these problems of colonialism because it's more democratic. You can have one, I can have one. Like there's all these sort of, it's like a great place to be
Hmm.
in the art history world
Yeah.
because it avoids a lot of those issues.
Yeah. No, I mean, and I think, the hierarchy, I mean, what I appreciate now is I think we're very much in a moment where we have fully acknowledged the hierarchies and the ways in
Hmm.
which we understand art history and taught art history needs to evolve, and that it's not one narrative, it's multi narrative. It is so much more nuanced and complex than the textbook will tell. And I think that there's more options for textbooks too, but I think what the issue tends to be is still the business of art, and
Mm.
how the education of the history of art then gets pulled into the business of art, because essentially we know there's only so much you can teach in a semester, even if for the history of art 101 classes, even when they're 2 semesters. And ultimately that there tends to be only a few textbooks that we still rely on. So I do think that there is still a lot of work to be done on the methodologies and the resources that we utilize to do that. So that way we're not continuing the same practices that I think we're taught because that's the way the older generation was taught. I think the funny thing is I always still think of how I still probably research or think of art because of how I was taught to think about it. And I try to shift that. I try not to be locked into that, but it's easy. Like that's where my brain goes first. So
Hmm.
if we are going to really shift how we think about prints, same I think with textiles, and put them on the same playing field, really say like, look, there is no real hierarchy. That's an antiquated understanding. Then we have to teach that way. We have to,
Hmm.
the new scholars have to I think they do. And I think we're doing that by having shows that are incorporating all the different types of media and really showing how they work together. And I think same with makers, that they're creating these ginormous prints that can be not only physically compete, I don't even want to say compete, they can physically work with, be in conversation with those giant narrative paintings.
Hmm.
But then you can see again all the different processes. And I think also same with like the labels, like we're telling people, hey, look, this may seem simple, but let me tell you how complicated this is. So that
Hmm.
way the average person who doesn't understand at least gets oh wow, I didn't realize that you would have to do like, you know, do 8 different colors, 8 different rolls. Each print is not really a replica. It's slightly unique because it doesn't actually roll, it doesn't actually come out the exact same way. And so,
Right.
or when you see video of the process, and some people are going like, oh my God, I didn't realize that that's in there. I think that you actually have to really show that. And people I think get excited because once they see it, they go like, "Oh my god, that's incredible." You
Yeah,
just have to introduce
for
them to
sure.
it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's that little speed bump I'm trying to get people over.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. And the proliferation of, how they print things and make them online is only helping because there's so many great videos out there about the process and, what goes into it.
Right.
So
Exactly.
it's all getting there.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
I'm just impatient.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it is because you want it to happen immediately. But I think, like with everything, evolution takes time. We,
Right.
as we
Yeah.
know, the humanity took a while to get here,
Yeah.
and we still got a lot of evolving to do just with society. So,
Yeah, a friend of mine who runs another podcast, hello, print friend, Miranda, who's wonderful, said one time, I love this and I think you'll love it too. And I can help you get there.
ooh,
Like
yes,
this, like I just sort of come with me.
right. Let me take you on a journey. Um,
Exactly. Let me tell you a
I
story.
think what's also being very what's helping the situation, or I should say, what's helping the people seeing the value in art is how many of the kind of the more pop culture figures are either collecting or they're really showing it, they're discussing it, for better or for worse. I think that there could also be there's an underside to that too that I don't quite like, but I do think that at least people you have to show them the value of it.
Hmm.
Oftentimes, like you said, I think you might like this, let me introduce it to you, because once you
Hmm.
introduce it, they go, oh yeah, that makes sense. Like, it's
Yeah.
important to sing, to dance, to create, to to use your senses in a way that's going to make your life and those around you better, more
Right.
interesting.
Yeah, how I describe why I did art history instead of straight history. Like
Hmm.
I'm not really, I'm not a politics person,
Yeah, me neither.
and reading about wars and campaigns and blah blah blah. Like art history is the cultural history,
Yes,
like the better parts of
right.
us.
I may hate the
Even though
moment, but at
they,
least there's some good looking items in there. Content may suck, but
yeah, yeah. I think it's easy to separate the object from the person who made it, but somebody had to think about it and
mhm,
somebody had to get it out through their hand.
yeah,
Like it's so easy to forget there's a person involved.
right,
Anyway.
exactly. And not only that, but is what they're creating a reflection of, or an answer, or a
Mm,
questioning, a challenge? As we know, they work in tandem. Like, you have to live life to create. The moments or the circumstances, lead to incredible creative expression, even in really dire, horrifying circumstances. But you need to understand those circumstances to understand the work and the person. And on top of that, say, well, maybe we're at a moment where we don't want to have to see this type of work again because that moment was so bad, and
right.
which led to its creation.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
or
Yeah,
vice
and
versa.
prints are full of it. Like
Yeah.
it's all there.
Yes, and then the importance of that circulation. I mean, the
Yeah.
printing press really helped folks out.
I know. It's crazy. Yeah. So before I let you go, can you share with us what you're working towards at the museum at the moment?
So right now we are in March 2023, right? Because we're in 2022. We're still March 2023. We're opening the A Movement in Every Direction: Legacies of the Great Migration, which is an exhibition that was organized by Ryan Dennis and Jessica Bell Brown, the Mississippi Museum of Art and the Baltimore Museum of Art. So we will be the third
Hmm.
venue in that. All commission works, really looking at the legacy of the Great Migration period in the United States. So very excited to be organizing the Brooklyn Museum's edition of that. And I have some collection shows I'm working on. So stay tuned for those. And then I'm also really proud of my exhibition, Black Orpheus and Jacob Lawrence and the Mbari Club, which has a lot of prints in there, works on paper as well. That exhibition is currently up at the Chrysler Museum through the early part of January, then travels to New Orleans Museum of Art and then the Toledo Museum of Art. That exhibition is really looking at Jacob Lawrence's time in Nigeria, the work that he did there that most people have no idea that he did, as well as pairing those works with the African art scene that was already happening the contemporary art scene that was happening in Nigeria, as well as other parts of Western Africa and East Africa, through a journal called Black Orpheus, which was an arts and culture publication. And through that work, you had artists from Brazil, Asia, India, Japan, all throughout the African continent, the United States, especially in this that civil rights post-independence era, and how these artists were really just trying to figure out, okay, we have all these new nations being created. We have independence from our colonial governments at the time. So
Overlords.
overlords, yeah,
Yeah.
masters.
Yeah.
How do we redefine ourselves and how do we use
Right.
art to do that? So there's a lot of printmaking in that show. So very happy about those projects.
The works that are from the Western Africa, Eastern Africa countries, like, did you source them from overseas? Or are they in collections here?
Mostly we got them in US and Europe. I would have loved to go to the African continent to actually get them. And I was in talks with some collectors. Unfortunately, it just was costs. As we know, shipping is not inexpensive. And there wasn't any kind of one or two collections. It would have had to have been a lot of individual collectors. So for more, logistical reasons, the Eva Leva House, which is at the University of Bayreuth in Germany, had a large collection of works there. So that was the most kind of international, and that we borrowed from a few private collections in Brazil. But mostly they were all US public and private institutions. But Brusana Brakpeya, who's probably one of the most well-known Nigerian printmakers in the world, he has several pieces in there, as long as Susan Wenger, who did works on batiks, and she did a lot of works on paper. So there's a lot. Rufus Agundale. I mean, there's a ton. So yeah, a lot of great artists in that show.
Oh, that's great. I think this is the thing that most people may not understand is that you have this unbelievably wonderful subject you want to present, but that logistics are preventing you from having the show that you would love to have.
Mhm.
There are adjustments you have to make. Were you able to produce a catalog? Because that's often a
Yes.
problem
Yes. So
for
we do have
museums.
yes, we do have a catalog. I'm very proud of that catalog.
That's great.
And I think it's a beautiful book. It's available. You can get it on any of the three institutions: Chrysler in New Orleans, Toledo. It's on Amazon as well through Yale Publishing. Yeah, and I think it really just adds to a story of an artist who is an American icon, but also gives you another addition to his story, as well as, again, introduces you to a lot of artists who I think unfortunately have not had the acclaim that they should have, but whose work, is on par with Lawrence's, and who had incredible careers, and whose work should also be within the canon. So hopefully through this, kind of like they do with Women's History Month, like, can you name five female artists? Can you just name five non-European artists, or American artists? Can you just name more people? I just want people to just have more names in their pockets.
Right.
Hmm.
Did this derive out of your dissertation work? You wrote on Lawrence, right?
No, so actually, it was kind of adjacent. So my dissertation was actually on photographic and filmic depictions of Lagos, Nigeria,
Oh,
from 1990 to 2002. So one of
oh,
those very,
interesting.
like, my elevator pitch dissertation. But when I was looking at research, just looking at kind of Lagos and how it had been seen and represented, Chico Kekegulo, who is a professor of the history of art at Princeton University, had written a book called Post-Colonial Modernism that was really looking at Nigeria specifically, but also another, most West Africa, looking at that kind of post-independence moment. And so that was kind of one of those ideas in my head. And then separately, I was interning at the Newark Museum at the time and had read in Lawrence's catalog resume about his time in Nigeria. So it was like these two kind of differing moments, but that were just kind of both percolating in my head. And so that started the ball rolling of just like, hey, this seems really interesting. And that really just got me started to think about it. So, yeah.
That's something that other people may not know either is that some of these ideas can percolate for 20 years before
Yeah.
you get a chance
Yeah.
to do something with it.
Exactly, because sometimes you're like, "Is this really a project?" Like, you just have to kind of just start that research to go like, let me see what this is. Let me see if this is going to be an idea that actually has some legs to it. And then you go, oh, it does. Okay, let me actually
Right.
figure this out and
Right.
start to work on it.
And to your earlier point about setting aside time for X, Y, and Z, like thinking time is important and developing these ideas. I mean, they don't just sort of fall fully formed into your lap. Like that's
Exactly.
the work of being a curator, part of it
Hmm.
anyway. Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. So,
Yeah.
so sally forth, my fellow curators.
That's right. Don't give up.
We can do this.
Yeah. It looks all glamorous and everything, but it's not always. It's a lot of hard
Not a
work.
lot of times you were just in a library going, "Oh, I've done all this work and this doesn't isn't going to go where I want it to go."
Right.
How do we pivot?
Rats.
Yeah,
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
exactly.
Well, thank you for talking with me today. I love talking to print adjacent people because, well, actually, I think you're in, so I'm just not even going to say it that
Thanks.
way. But somebody ought to nominate you into the print council. Um,
Ooh, okay. Hey, I'm for
I
it.
am no longer a member because I'm in the quote unquote trade now. But
Ah,
I'll whisper in someone's ear.
thank you. Thanks
Take
so
a look at
much.
Kimberly. She's awesome.
Well, this has been a wonderful conversation. It's been
Thank
really, really
you.
great, and thank you for inviting me.
Of course, of course. It was love talking to you as well. I knew I'd like you.
Yay!
Yay! Thank you for joining me for this episode of Platemark. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Kimberli. She's a joy to talk to, and I hope I get a chance to do it again. Thank you, as always, to Michael Diamond for the use of his original music. And another reminder that any images we talk about are available over on the website, platemarkpodcast.com, as well as the support and donate button, which will enable you to support the work of Platemark. Read me, who's sitting alone in an office in Baltimore, Maryland, making this thing out of the goodness of my heart now, because I love it. As you all know, I'm a passionate evangelist for prints and printmaking, so join us, will you? All right, I think that's it. We will see you next time.